Bye banana! Obelego, banana dị ụtọ.
The tenants froze in their beds. The sound drifted through the hallways, soft at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. Some thought it was a child outside selling bananas late into the night. But as the voice grew louder, clearer, it became evident the sound was coming from inside the house. A woman, Adora, living in apartment 3, sat up in fear. She nudged her husband.
Chuka, did you hear that?
Her husband grumbled, half asleep.
Go back to sleep.
But Adora could not sleep because the sound was now right outside their bedroom door. A faint knocking.
Obelego, banana dị ụtọ.
She woke up screaming, her heart breaking anew each morning. Nnenna, the banana girl. In the heart of Awada, Obosi, where the streets are always alive with the sound of commerce, a young girl walked barefoot on the hot, dusty roads. Her name was Nnenna, a child of only 8, yet she carried the weight of a family on her small shoulders. Her world was different from that of other children. While many her age were in school, learning to read and write, Nnenna's classroom was the open market, and her lessons were survival. Every morning, before the first rays of sunlight touched the earth, she was already awake. In a small single-room apartment with cracked walls and a leaking roof, her mother, Mama Nnenna, carefully peeled ripe bananas, packing them neatly in a tray.
Nnenna, biko hurry up!
Her mother's tired voice called out. Nnenna was already tying the faded wrapper around her tiny waist. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and picked up the tray, balancing it carefully on her head. Her little brother Chiemelie, barely 5 years old, sat on the mat in the corner, watching her. His stomach growled, but he said nothing. He had learned that complaints never brought food, only more sadness. Nnenna forced a smile, stepping over to rub his head.
Chiemelie, I will bring back something sweet for you today,
she promised. The boy nodded eagerly. He trusted her words. He always did. With one last look at her mother, who was already preparing to leave for the market where she sold granules, Nnenna stepped into the world once again. Awada was a place of endless movements. Traders shouted their prices. Okada riders whipped dangerously through narrow roads, and the air smelled of roasted plantain mixed with exhaust fumes. But Nnenna knew every corner of the streets. She had walked them since she was old enough to talk. With her tray balanced perfectly, she began her usual chant, her voice carrying through the air.
Bye banana! Obelego, banana dị ụtọ.
It was a call she had mastered over time, loud enough to grab attention, sweet enough to make people stop. She walked from streets to streets, dodging careless drivers, weaving through crowds and smiling at familiar faces. Some people pitied her, a girl so young, working so hard. Others barely noticed her, just another child of poverty lost in the sea of struggle. But Nnenna never complained. She was used to the long hours, the heat, the aching feet. She had accepted that this was her life. Until that day, the day everything changed, the day she crossed paths with Odogwu. It was late afternoon and Nnenna had not made enough sales. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows on the streets. She was about to take the shortcut home when she passed by a half-built house. An uncompleted building standing tall and lonely in an empty plot of land. Blocks were stacked in piles, bags of cement lay untouched, and wooden planks were scattered around. Something about it felt wrong. The air around it was too quiet, as if the place held its breath, waiting. But Nnenna did not pay much attention. She lifted her voice again, calling out her sales chants.
Bye banana! Obelego, banana dị ụtọ.
That was when she heard a man's voice.
Wanyoma.
She froze for a moment, looking towards the building. A man stood in the shadows, half hidden by the unfinished walls. He was dressed well, in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers. But there was something in his posture, something unsettling. He waved at her, gesturing for her to come closer.
Come here, my pikin. I want buy banana.
Nnenna hesitated. Something inside her screamed to turn away. She took a step back, but then she thought of her brother. Chiemelie was hungry. Mama needed money. And so, ignoring the warning that burned in her chest, Nnenna stepped forward. Her small feet crossed the threshold into the shadows of the uncompleted building. The tray on her head wobbled slightly, but she quickly steadied it.
Oga, how many you want buy?
She asked, forcing a polite smile. The man's lips coiled into something that was not quite a smile, and then the world went dark. The moment Nnenna stepped into the unfinished building, the world outside seemed to disappear. The street noises, the honking of cars, the distant chatter of traders all faded into silence. A strange coldness settled in the air. The smell of damp cement and dust filled her nostrils. She shifted uncomfortably, gripping the tray on her head.
Oga, how many you want buy?
She asked again, hoping to make her sell quickly and leave. The man, Odogwu, did not answer immediately. He stood still, watching her. With an unsettling expression, his eyes calculating. Then he took slow steps forward, closing the space between them.
Your banana go sweet?
He finally asked, his voice smooth, too smooth. Nnenna forced a smile, though something in her gut told her to turn and run. Her instinct screamed at her, but she pushed them aside. She had been selling bananas for years. She had met all kinds of customers. Some were kind, some were rude, some were simply strange. Perhaps he was just another strange one.
Yes, Oga,
She replied politely.
my banana sweet well. How many you go buy?
Odogwu's lips curled into something that looked like a smile, but not quiet.
I go buy everything.
He said. Nnenna's eyes widened in surprise.
Everything?
That had never happened before. Most people bought 2, maybe 3 bananas at most.
You go buy everything, Oga?
She repeated, a hint of disbelief in her voice. He nodded.
Yes, but first, drop am for ground. I go count the money.
Something inside her hesitated, but money was money. She carefully lowered the tray from her head, setting it on the dusty floor, and that was when she felt it. A shift in the air, a sudden tension, like the world around her had just sealed shut. Before she could react, a heavy hand clamped over her mouth. Her scream was swallowed by the silence. Odogwu dragged her deeper into the building, his grip firm and unrelenting. Nnenna kicked and thrashed, but she was small, too small to fight against the strength of a grown man. Tears spilled from her wide, terrified eyes as she struggled. She tried to bite his hand, but he only tightened his grip. No one could hear her. No one would save her. In the dimness of the building, another figure emerged, a dark-robed man with a face carved like stone. His beaded necklace rattled as he stepped forward, his eyes holding no mercy, no humanity.
She be the right one?
He asked. Odogwu, breathing heavily, nodded.
She be the innocent blood we need.
The priest's lips stretched into a cruel smile.
Good, bring her.
Nnenna shook her head violently, her muffled cries growing desperate. She did not understand everything they were saying, but she knew one thing: she was about to die. The earth takes the blood. The ground had already been prepared. A deep pit had been dug in the center of the building's foundation. It was meant to be filled with cement, but tonight it will be filled with something else. Odogwu forced Nnenna to her knees, holding her down as she screamed into his hand. The juju priest brought out a small calabash filled with a dark thick liquid, blood mixed with herbs.
The spirits are waiting.
The priest murmured.
They will take her. In return, your wealth will never dry.
Nnenna's small body shook violently as she tried to break free.
Biko, leave me!
She screamed, but the wasp did not care. The knight did not care. And in that moment, the knife came down. The sharp pain lasted only seconds. Then, silence. Her blood spilled into the earth, soaking into the foundation of the house that would soon be rise above it. The juju priest chanted. Odogwu watched in trembling awe, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement.
It is done,
the priest said at last. And just like that, the sacrifice was complete. The hole was covered, the foundation was laid, and the house began to rise. But not all spirits rest easily. The house is built. Months later, the house stood tall and proud, gleaming under the sun. Odogwu boasted about it to anyone who would listen.
My house go stand forever,
He declared.
nothing go ever bring them down.
Tenants rushed to rent it. Families moved in, filling the rooms with life, with laughter, with dreams. But deep beneath the foundation, something stirred. A presence, a whisper, a restless soul, and soon the first signs appeared. At exactly 1 a.m., the whispers began, soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, then louder, more urgent, until on a quiet night, a tenant woke up in a terror to a chilling familiar sound.
Buy banana! Obelego, banana dị ụtọ.
The walls trembled, the air turned ice cold. The house, once a place of promise, had become something else entirely, a tomb, and Nnenna was not done. Not yet. Then Nnenna disappeared. The world did not stop moving. The sun still rose over Awada. Traders still opened their stalls. Children still played in the streets. But for one woman, the world had ended. Mama Nnenna, a widow, a mother, a woman who had already lost too much, waited by the door that evening, expecting to hear the familiar voice of her daughter calling from the streets.
Mama, anatagum.
That was how it always happened. That was the routine. But that evening, silence came instead, and Mama Nnenna's heart grew cold. The first signs of fear. At first, she tried to stay calm.
Maybe she dey delay for market. Maybe she dey follow another road.
But as the minutes turned to hours, a deep twisting fear settled in her chest. She paced outside, her wrapper tied tightly around her waist, her feet restless.
Nnenna, Nnenna, where you dey?
She called, her voice raw with worry. She asked the women sitting outside their compound, the Okada riders at the junction, the traders locking up their shops.
Una see my pikin?
Every answer was the same. No, we never see him today. Mama Nnenna felt her knees go weak. Her daughter, her precious Nnenna, was missing. That night, she did not sleep. She walked the streets of Awada, knocking on the doors, calling out to strangers. She went to every shop, every roadside vendor, every corner where Nnenna could pass with her tray of bananas. But no one had seen her. By morning, her voice was hoarse, her feet bruised, but still she searched. She went to the market where she bought bananas. She spoke to traders, drivers, even beggars sitting by the roadside. Nothing. It was as if her daughter had vanished into thin air. And then she went to the police. When she arrived at the police station, her clothes were soaked in sweat, her eyes red from crying.
Oga police, I beg, help me. My pikin never come back house.
The officer looked at her lazily, chewing on a stick of gum.
How old she be?
He asked.
She be 12.
Mama Nnenna replied, her voice shaking. The officer clicked his tongue and leaned back in his chair.
Madam, if it be say she run follow man o.
Mama Nnenna gasped.
My Nnenna? No, she no fit do that oh.
The officer shrugged, uninterested.
Children dey run away every day. She go come back.
She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face.
I beg you, help me. She never run before. She dey sell banana for road. She no fit disappear just like that.
The officer sighed, waved his hand dismissively.
Madam, if she no come back after 3 days, come back make we write reports.
3 days?
Mama Nnenna felt the ground shift beneath her. Her daughter was missing, and these men did not care. Her cries, her pain, they meant nothing. Slowly she rose to her feet, wiping her face with the edge of her wrapper. If the police would not help her, she would find Nnenna herself. And so her search continued. For weeks, she searched. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She knocked on every door, questioned every face. She went to churches, asking pastors to pray for her. She visited native doctors, begging them to help her see where her daughter was. Some told her Nnenna was still alive. Some told her she was dead. Some told her to forget. But a mother does not forget. Every night she dreamed of Nnenna's voice, calling her from somewhere far away.
Mama, Mama, I want come home.
She woke up screaming, her heart breaking anew each morning.
She searched until her body could no longer move. Until one day she collapsed on the roadside, her strength completely gone. She had no more tears to cry, and finally, in her weakest moment, she accepted the truth. Nnenna was never coming back. Her daughter was gone, and there was nothing left to do but mourn. As the months passed, the world moved on. The house where Nnenna had been buried stood tall, welcoming its first tenants. Mama Nnenna sat outside her small house, staring at the road where her daughter once walked. Every day she waited, every day she listened, every day she hoped, but Nnenna never came home. Until one night, in the stillness of her room, she heard it, a faint faraway voice.
Bye, banana! Obelego, banana dị ụtọ.
Her eyes flew open. She sat up, her heart pounding. It was impossible. She rushed outside, looking down the street, searching, but there was no one there. Just the whisper of the wind, the distant glow of streetlights, and an empty road. Yet, deep inside her soul, she knew her daughter's spirit had not found rest, and somewhere in Awada, a storm was coming.
The house stood tall, its fresh paint gleaming under the Awada sun. To an outsider, it was a symbol of success, a duplex built for prosperity. But deep beneath its foundation, in cold embrace of the earth, Nnenna did not sleep. Her blood had mixed with the soil. Her cries had been swallowed by the concrete. Her body had been forgotten, but her spirit remembered. And now she was ready to be heard. It was a joyful occasion when the first tenants arrived. Families with children, newlyweds, hard-working traders looking for a fresh start. The building had 6 apartments, each with spacious rooms, polished floors, and wide windows that welcomed the breeze. Odogwu, pleased with himself, collected rent from each family, laughing as the money piled up in his hands.
This house go give me wealth forever,
he boasted to his friends. He had no idea what was coming. At first, everything seemed normal. The tenants settled in, arranging their furniture, sweeping their balconies, cooking their evening meals. The house was filled with the sounds of life, children playing, mothers gossiping, fathers returning home from work. But on the third night, something changed. The air in the house grew heavy, like an unseen force pressing against the walls. And then, at exactly 1 a.m., the silence shattered. A voice, a small distant voice.
Bye, banana! Obelego, banana dị ụtọ.
The tenants froze in their beds. The sound drifted through the hallways, soft at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. Some thought it was a child outside selling bananas late into the night. But as the voice grew louder, clearer, it became evident the sound was coming from inside the house. A woman, Adora, living in apartment 3, sat up in fear. She nudged her husband.
Chuka, did you hear that?
Her husband grumbled, half asleep.
go back to sleep.
But Adora could not sleep because the sound was now right outside their bedroom door. A faint knocking.
Obelego, banana dị ụtọ.
Adora's blood ran cold. She gripped her husband's arm, her heart shaky.
Chuka, wake up.
But as soon as he opened his eyes, the knocking stopped. The air was still, too still. Adora held her breath, listening. Nothing, only silence. Shaking her head, she whispered,
Maybe I imagined it too.
But deep inside, she knew the truth. Something was not right with this house. As the days passed, strange things began to happen. Tenants lost their jobs without reason. Money mysteriously disappeared from wallets and purses. Children fell sick with illnesses that had no cure. Food rotting overnight, even in the fridge. One by one, the tenants began to suffer. Even the strongest men, the wealthiest traders, the most devoted women, they all felt the weight of something unnatural pressing down on them. And every night, at exactly 1 a.m., the voice returned.
Bye, banana! Obelego, banana dị ụtọ.
Some tired to ignore it, some prayed against it, some refused to believe it, but the voice never stopped. And then came the sightings. A tenant sees her. It was a cold evening and Chijoke, a businessman who had just moved into the duplex, was counting his money in his bedroom. He has made good sales that day and planned to deposit the cash in the bank the next morning. He smiled to himself, stacking the naira notes carefully on his bedside table. But just as he turned off his lamp to sleep, something felt off. The air around him had turned cold, unnaturally cold. Then, out of nowhere, a small shadowy figure appeared at the front of his bed. Chijioke's breath caught in his throat. His body froze. The figure stepped closer. And then he saw her, a little girl. Her eyes were hollow, her face pale and lifeless. Her small hands clutched something, a tray of bananas. But the bananas were blackened, rotten, dripping with something thick and dark. Chijioke opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The girl's lips moved, but her voice was distant, echoing as if from another world.
Oga, you wan buy banana?
His body broke free from its frozen state. He scrambled out of bed, knocking over his money as he longed for the door. But just as he reached for the handle, a strong, icy grip closed around his ankle. He looked down. The girl was holding him. Her fingers tightened. Her lips peeled back into a chilling smile, and then she whispered,
Give me my money.
The room plunged into darkness. Chijioke's scream tore through the house. The next morning, Chijioke packed his bags and left. He did not tell anyone what he had seen. He did not dare.
The house that once welcomed tenants with promises of comfort and prosperity had now become a place of suffering. The echoes of laughter that once filled the rooms had long been replaced with cries of despair. The tenant who had entered the house with hope now lived in fear, because Nnenna was awake, and she was angry. By now, everyone in the building had experienced something unnatural. Objects moved on their own. Shadows flickered where no one stood. Unseen hands touched people in their sleep. But the worst part was the voice. Every night at exactly 1 a.m. it returned.
Buy banana! Obelego, banana di uto.
The whisper slithered through the house, creeping into every room, coiling around the ears of every tenant. Some tried to ignore it, some wept in fear, some prayed for morning to come. But the voice never stopped. And then the apparitions began. One of the tenants, Emeka, had always been a skeptic.
Ghost no dey o,
He would say.
Now all these people they imagine things.
But one night he became a believer. He had just returned from work, exhausted. He dropped his bag, loosened his tie, and collapsed onto his bed. Within minutes, he was fast asleep. Then a noise. At first it was soft, a gentle rustling, like footsteps on the tiles. He stirred but didn't wake. Then a knock, soft at first, then louder. His eyes fluttered open, his heart pounding.
Who be that?
He muttered, his voice groggy. No response. Then the door creaked open, slowly, painfully, and in the dim of his room, he saw her. A small girl standing in the doorway, her tray of bananas balanced on her head. Her face was shadowed, but her eyes hollow, empty, staring straight at him. Then she spoke.
Oga, you wan buy banana?
A shiver shot down his spine.
Who you be?
He whispered. She stepped closer. Her feet did not touch the ground.
Oga, you go pay?
Her voice was sharp now, demanding. Emeka tried to move. He couldn't. His body was frozen, his breath trapped in his chest. Then the tray slipped from her head. The bananas hit the ground with a white, sickening splat. They were rotting, black, crawling with maggots, and from beneath them, blood poured across the floor. Emeka's screams shattered the night. The next morning, Emeka packed his bags. He didn't care about his rent. He didn't care about his belongings. He just needed to leave. But before he left, he told someone about it. A man he trusted, a man who could help, his pastor. At Sunday service, Emeka sat at the back of the church, his mind restless, tormented. He had to tell someone. After the service, he approached Pastor Chinedu, the man of God who had guided him for years.
Pastor, I beg, I need to talk to you.
There was something in Emeka's eyes that made the pastor pause, a deep fear, a fear that only came from something unnatural.
What is it, my son?
Emeka took a deep breath, then told him everything. The whispers, the shadows, the sightings, and finally the girl. Pastor Chinedu listened in silence, his fear unreadable. Then, when Emeka finished, the pastor closed his eyes and took a deep breath.
The spirit of the innocent is crying for justice,
he murmured. Then his eyes snapped open.
Take me to this house.
That evening, the pastor arrived at the building. The moment he stepped in, he felt it. A presence. A spirit that had been trapped in suffering for too long. He walked through the house, praying softly, letting the Holy Spirit guide him. Then he stopped. His eyes fell on the foundation of the building, and a deep sadness filled his chest.
She is here.
He whispered. Emeka stared at him in confusion.
Who?
The pastor turned to him, his expression grave.
A child was buried beneath this house. Her soul is not at rest.
A collective gasp rose from the other tenants who had gathered to listen. Then the pastor raised his hand and declared,
This house carries a curse. Whoever built it shed innocent blood. Until justice is done, no one will know peace here.
Silence fell over the group. Then, one by one, the tenants began to pack their things. Nobody wanted to stay in a house of death. By the next morning, the building was empty. It had become a house abandoned by the living, but still occupied by the dead. And somewhere across town, in his grand duplex, Odogwu slept peacefully, unaware that his time was running out, because Nnenna was coming for him, and she would not stop until justice was served. The once lively duplex that Odogwu had built for his tenants now stood empty and lifeless. Its windows, once polished and bright, now stared like hollow eyes. Its corridors, once filled with laughter and footsteps, now heard only whispers of the past. The house had been abandoned, left to decay. But the course was not done, because while the tenants had left, Nnenna's revenge was just the beginning. And now she was coming for the one who had stolen her life. She was coming for Odogwu. Odogwu sat in his grand duplex, far from the house he had built with blood and betrayal. Life was good for him. The tenants may have left, but his wealth remained. He had new business deals, new properties, new connections. He had convinced himself that the rumors about the house were nothing but gossip from weak-minded people.
Fear too much for this country,
he often said, laughing with his friends. But in the dead of the night, when all was silent, he was not laughing, because that was when it began. It started small, a soft knock on the window, faint, almost gentle. Odogwu ignored it. Then a whisper.
Buy banana. Obelego, banana di uto.
Odogwu froze. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone to check the time. 1 a.m. His chest tightened.
I be big man.
He muttered under his breath, shaking off the creeping unease.
Ghosts no fit disturb me.
But the next night, it got worse. Odogwu woke up gasping for air, his body drenched in sweat. His room was pitch black, but something felt wrong. The air was thick and heavy, suffocating. Then a shadow moved in the corner. He turned his head slowly, and there, standing by the door, was a small figure. A girl. Her face was hidden in the darkness, but he knew. His breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped forward. Her feet did not touch the ground. Her hands clutched a tray of black rotting bananas, and then she spoke.
Oga, you want buy banana?
Odogwu's body went stiff, his mouth open, but no sound came out. The girl's head tilted to the side, her voice softened now, almost mocking.
You go pay?
A cold gust of air rushed through the room, knocking over his bedside lamp. Odogwu longed for the light switched, but before he could reach it, the entire room shook. The windows rattled, the walls groaned. Then the girl screamed. Her voice pierced through the room, shaking the very foundation of the house. Odogwu fell to his knees, his ears ringing, his vision blurring, and then everything went silent. When he opened his eyes, the girl was gone. But on the floor, his money lay scattered, covered in dark stains, and the faint sound of laughter echoed in the distance. From that night, Odogwu's life fell apart. His business crumbled. Deals that had been certain suddenly collapsed. His bank account drained. Money vanished without explanation. His health declined. Doctors found nothing wrong, but he grew weaker each day. His friends abandoned him, sensing the darkness that now surrounded him. Every night, the hauntings grew worse. Every night she returned. Every night she asked the same questions.
You go pay?
Until one night, he could take it no more. It was raining heavily, the kind of storm that made even the strongest men uneasy. Odogwu locked himself in his bedroom, refusing to sleep. He had prayed, he had begged, he had tried everything. But nothing stopped her. As the clock struck 1 a.m., he held his breath waiting. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. No knocks, no whispers, no shadows. Odogwu exhaled shakily, relief washing over him.
It don't end.
He whispered. Then a voice from behind him.
Oga, you want buy banana?
His body turned cold, slowly with trembling hands. He turned round. And there she was, Nnenna. Her eyes black, hollow, endless. Her mouth twisted into a wide, haunting smile. The tray on her head empty. And then she stepped forward.
Oga, give me my money.
Odogwu screamed. He tried to run, but his legs failed him. He tried to fight, but his body was too weak. Then her cold hands touched his chest, and in that moment, he felt everything. Every tear she had shed, every plea she had made, every moment of fear, pain, and betrayal, it consumed him. Odogwu's eyes rolled back. His body collapsed to the ground. His last breath escaped his lips. And as he lay lifeless, the air in the room grew still. The storm outside calmed, and in the darkness, Nnenna smiled. Her revenge was complete. Odogwu was dead, but the story was far from over. His lifeless body was found the next morning by a neighbor, lying on the cold floor of his mansion, his eyes wide open in pure terror. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle, but his hands were clenched so tightly that his fingernails had dug deep into his palms. And beside him on the floor lay a single rotten banana. The news spread like wildfire across Awada.
Odogwu don't die. Them say na spirits kill am. It be like say he offend person we no suppose offend.
But those who knew the real story, the tenants, the pastor, the ones who had suffered inside his cursed house, they did not need to guess. They knew Nnenna had taken her revenge, and her spirit was still not done. With Odogwu dead, his properties were abandoned. His mansion remained empty, collecting dust and decay. But the house he had built for tenants, the house where innocent blood had been spilled, became something far worse. It became a place of fear, a place that no one in Awada dared to enter. Landlords tried to sell it, but no buyer ever agreed. Even when the price was dropped to almost nothing, no one wanted it. The walls still held the whispers, the floor still echoed the footsteps of the dead. And every night at exactly 1 a.m. the voice returned.
Buy banana. Obelego, banana di uto.
At first, brave people tried to test the stories. Men would stand outside the house at midnight, daring each other to stay until morning. None of them ever did. The moment the voice began, the bravest among them fled without looking back. And soon no one dared to go near. It became a ghost house, a place where only spirits dwell, a place forever cursed. As the years passed, the story of Nnenna became a legend. Mothers would warn their children not to walk alone at night, lest they hear the voice of the banana girl calling to them. Elders would shake their heads, whispering about the greed of men like Odogwu and how the blood of the innocent never stays silent. Some people claim that if you walked past the house on a quiet night, you would see her, a small girl standing in the darkness, holding a tray of bananas that never rotted. Her face hidden in the shadows, her voice soft but chilling.
Oga, you want buy banana?
No one ever answered. No one ever stayed to see what happened next. Because in Awada, one truth was clear. Nnenna's ghost would never leave. The house falls, but the curse remains. Years later, in an attempt to erase the past, the government decided to demolish the house. They brought in bulldozers, hammers, and strong men ready to tear down its walls. But strange things began to happen. Machines broke down without reason. Workers fell sick suddenly and had to be taken away. The tools disappeared overnight. Every attempt to destroy the building failed, until finally the workers refused to continue.
We don't go fit do am o.
They said,
This house no be ordinary.
and so the building remained. A ghostly structure in the middle of a bustling city, a reminder of the girl who had been buried beneath its foundation. A warning to all who would trade innocence for greed. And though the walls cracked and crumbled with time, nature began to reclaim the land. One thing never changed. At exactly 1 a.m., if you dare to listen, you will still hear it. Soft at first, then louder.
buy banana. Obelego, banana di uto.
And those who had it never stayed long enough to hear it. The moral of the story is that greed and injustice never go unpunished, as the truth always finds a way to surface. The spirit of the wrong will seek justice, even from beyond the grave. In the end, no evil deeds remain hidden forever. Please consider subscribing to our channel if you are yet to do that. Like and share this video. And until we meet on our next story, bye.